Hello, everyone. My name is Jeanette Southwood. My pronouns are she, her, elle. I am the Executive Vice President, Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at Engineers Canada, and I'm an engineer. Happy National Engineering Month. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's kickoff event, sharing your story to inspire kids to explore engineering. As part of our commitment to incorporating Indigenous ways of being and ways of knowing into the engineering profession, I would like to begin today's webinar by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. At Engineers Canada, we believe that it is important to personalize our land acknowledgement. I myself am an immigrant and a settler on these lands. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection and to acknowledge the effect of residential schools and colonialism on Indigenous families and communities, and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Engineers Canada is the national association of the provincial and territorial engineering regulators who license the more than 330,000 members of the engineering profession in Canada. National Engineering Month is one of Engineers Canada's most important outreach initiatives. It's a time to celebrate the incredible impact engineering has on our communities and how engineers open doors to new possibilities and innovations. The theme, Open Doors, also reminds us that we each have a role in making engineering more visible, more accessible, and more inclusive. Today's webinar is all about sharing stories, your stories. Each of us has a journey that brought us to engineering, and sharing those experiences can spark curiosity, imagination, and inspiration in the next generation. Engineering isn't just about formulas or machines. It's about creativity, collaboration, problem solving, and making a difference. By sharing what led us here, we can open doors for kids who may not yet have imagined themselves in this field. In this webinar, you'll hear from subject matter experts from various backgrounds with diverse journeys and passions. Christopher Davidson, Isabelle Deslauriers, Rebecca White, and Scott Campo. I encourage you to listen, ask questions, and think about how your story can inspire someone else. Join us in celebrating National Engineering Month by joining events throughout the month and engaging on social media. Thank you for being part of this session and for helping the next generation see what's possible through engineering. I'll now turn the floor over to my colleague, Kim Bouffard, Engineers Canada's Manager, Outreach and Belonging, to kick things off. Over to you, Kim.
Great. Thank you, Jeanette, for the warm welcome and providing today's land acknowledgement. My name is Kim Bouffard, and as mentioned, I'm the Manager of Belonging and Engagement at Engineers Canada. I lead our work in outreach, engagement, equity, diversity, inclusion, and truth and reconciliation. And National Engineering Month is one of the initiatives within this portfolio. And I'm delighted to be here with you to moderate this discussion and to officially launch the month. This year's theme, Engineers Open Doors, focuses on the next generation, K-12 youth, and the role each of you can play in inspiring youth, young people, to see engineering as an impactful and rewarding career. As we move through today's discussion, I encourage you to share your questions for our panelists using the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screen. While we may not be able to answer every single question live, we will be following up in the coming days and share responses by email with all attendees. We're fortunate to have an outstanding panel of youth outreach and engagement leaders, individuals who have dedicated their careers and volunteer efforts to inspiring the next generation and amplifying the E in STEM. Each of them is connected to the Forward Engineering Collective, a new collaboration of like-minded organizations working to strengthen engineering education across Canada. The collective is rooted in 4 shared actions and a common goal: building a more inclusive, connected, and visible engineering learning atmosphere within Canada. The idea is that by pooling our expertise, networks, and creativity, members are tackling systemic barriers, sparking innovation, and creating more opportunities for young people to understand what engineering truly is and what it makes possible. Engineers Canada is proud to be a founding member and to serve as a backbone organization supporting this work. This represents a meaningful shift in how Engineers Canada is investing in and advancing early awareness of the profession. As many of you know, engineers drive innovation and solve some of society's most complex challenges, yet it remains one of the least understood disciplines within STEM education. Too often, students have limited exposure to what engineers do or the pathways available to them. Through partnerships with STEM-focused organizations like the ones who are joining us on the panel today, we are working to ensure every young person can explore engineering in ways that are inclusive, inspiring, and relevant. So please join me in welcoming Isabelle Delorier, Rebecca White, and Scott Campo, founding members of the Forward Engineering Collective, and Chris Davison, a longtime volunteer and a champion for youth engagement. To get us started, I'll invite each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Isabelle, maybe we could start with you.
Sure, thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. My name is Isabelle Delaurier, and I work at Let's Talk Science, which is also known as Parlons Science. We're a national charity that works tirelessly to get kids excited about all aspects of STEM. At Let's Talk Science, I oversee all our youth programming and all our volunteer-driven programs through which engineering students and professional engineers engage kids in hands-on STEM activities all across Canada. So I've been asked to share a fun fact. So as a fun fact, I just came back from a trip to Antarctica and it was amazing.
That's fantastic. Maybe Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks, Kim. So my name is Rebecca White and I lead Engineers of Tomorrow. We're a national charity that also is working to change the messages that young people are getting about engineering. I get to spend most of my time thinking about how we make engineering more visible, more accessible to all those young folks across the country and why that's so important. I liked your fun fact, Isabelle. I did not recently visit Antarctica. I wish I could have joined you. The fun fact I chose to share was just to give you a little more insight into, I guess, my personal journey. And so what I thought was really interesting was that, you know, I graduated from chemical engineering. I worked in food and pharmaceutical manufacturing for many, many years. But it wasn't until I stepped away from that and engineering that I actually really connected more with my identity and the engineering ecosystem. So there you go. Now you know a little bit more about me.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Scott.
Yes. So hi, everybody. So my name is Scott. So I'm currently now the Director of Education and Innovation for BGC Southeast, which is known as sort of the Boys and Girls Club of Kingston and the surrounding area. Prior to that, you know, I did my original sort of profession was in chemical engineering as well, similar to Rebecca's, working in sort of chemical protection for first responders and military, and just watching sort of the levels of protection when they were wearing a respirator. So from clinical trials or research trials to full-scale trials working on military bases across the country. And then sort of shifting from there afterwards, I kind of came back into the education sector. So taking what I had learned and applied as a professional engineer, and then coming over into mainstream education where I became a classroom teacher, and then made my way into grad school and staying in this realm of engineering education. So for the last 10 years, or 10 years plus, kind of working within this with a focus on sort of marrying those two pieces of the engineering profession and education, and trying to address some of those questions and those misperceptions around engineering and the profession. So that's a little bit about me. Fun fact, I have fun-ish, you know, 2 young children that are, for any of those that have gone through that yet, you know, really in the phases and the trenches of trying to manage full-time work, young family and personal life. And I don't know if I'm doing it very well, but that's where I'm at in my stage of life here.
Thanks, Scott. I'm sure there's plenty of people on the call, including myself, that can empathize with having two young kids. So thanks for joining us. Christopher, over to you.
Hi, my name is Chris Davidson. I've been a consulting civil engineer for about 20 years. And for the past 10 years, I've been working on student outreach. I've been working a lot with Engineers Tomorrow. So getting into classrooms, getting to talk to students. And fun fact about me, my favorite sport is archery, which it's good for engaging students. And to be clear, that's stories about archery, not actually engaging them with the bow.
Great, thanks, Chris. So now that we know a little bit about all of you and what you do and some fun facts, so thank you for sharing that. Wondering if you could share what excites you about working with youth, and why do you think it's important that we're having this conversation today to try and engage more engineers in helping to engage youth in engineering? And maybe Rebecca, would you like to go first this time?
Sure, thanks, Kim. I wanted to throw the question out to everybody that's joining us live today, and I guess those of you as well that might be watching the recording. Did you meet an engineer before you chose your career or your pathway? And I'd be willing to bet that for a lot of you, the answer to that question is no. And that really speaks to my why and Engineers of Tomorrow's, and I'm sure the other panelists here today as well, that that's a big problem. Engineering, when I think about it, it isn't just another career choice. Of course it is, and it's a great one, but it's much more than that. It's really this profession that stewards and builds the systems we need and rely on. Like, gosh, Scott, talking about first responders, like, oh, what a meaningful thing to be able to do. But there's infrastructure and our safe, clean water and healthcare and all the technologies around that, energy systems, and things are just moving faster and faster, right? These technologies are speeding up, communities are getting bigger, and needs are more complex. So we really, I just believe we really need thoughtful, ethical, engineers that are shaping these systems. But here's the challenge. And to get to your question, Kim, the thing that really excites me is that this challenge is that engineering it's invisible to these young people. I was thinking about it kind of like our Wi-Fi. We're all here today and we love it. We rely on it. It powers everything that we do. But we only really appreciate it and notice it when or if it's gone. And then I also look at the profession as it is today with only about 15% women. And I really don't personally believe that reflects kind of a national or a natural preference, right? It's really, it's more about exposure and perception and culture. And so when you see large groups of people that are opting out of something, and engineering in this case, to me, it's not about the ability of that group of people. It's about awareness and it's about belonging. So I'm super excited about the idea of National Engineering Month being about opening doors. And I like to think about the youth engagement piece is that we get to turn the lights on so that they can see those doors. So sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded way of saying my why, but I get to think a lot about it. So.
Who would like to go next? Isabel, go ahead.
Sure,
Yeah.
I can jump in. So for me, it's very personal. I decided to go into electrical engineering as a direct result of being a kid who was engaged in an outreach activity. So I would consider myself very fortunate that my mom was a teacher and my dad was a physicist. So they made sure to expose us to all kinds of different things, including science. And I really gravitated towards science and electronics with my dad and so on. But even though I was exposed to all those kinds of things, I didn't make the connection to a profession in engineering. So it took until I was in high school and I had the opportunity to attend engineering, like a camp activity run by engineering students. And I'll always remember the first day, all the campers showed up and the students asked, oh, who knows what an engineer does? And even though like this was a bunch of kids who had signed up for engineering camp, nobody could answer that question. And I couldn't, even though I had been exposed to it. And even, you know, in retrospect, I'm sure my dad worked with engineers at the company he worked at. However, by the end of the camp, you know, I had seen that all those things that I loved doing as a hobby in school and so on were connected to the engineering profession. And I had been exposed to these students who were just a little bit older than me, who were engineering students, and they seemed so cool and so smart, and they knew how to do all those things. And they were telling me they were going into engineering. So that's how I decided to go into engineering. And I put a little postcard of the university I wanted to go to on my wall, and that just gave me that goal. So I think it speaks to like even, you know, whatever background you're from, just engineering, like Rebecca was saying, that is just not very visible. It's not visible in schools. It's not really visible at home, which are some of the primary places where kids form their ideas of what they want to study and what kind of careers they want to pursue. So I think it's super important. There's a super important role for outreach to play in all this. And, you know, like I was saying, it's personal for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Isabel. Scott.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go next. So I'll just sort of piggyback, I mean, and reiterate sort of what Rebecca and Isabel have shared already, right? And I think for many of us that are probably on the call or listening in, I'm sure you can go back to your own thoughts on, okay, well, why did you maybe choose, you know, engineering? You know, was it an individual? Was it one sort of exposure or experience that kind of you know, helped you choose that? Or were you in the norm of maybe a guidance counselor or somebody that said you were strong in math and science in school, so therefore that is the route? We've heard this narrative for many years. I even think back to my own pathway into it, right? So the invisibility, as Isabel and Rebecca said. Now, one thing I wanted to share that sort of excites me is I've, you know, for my career have always been questioning, okay, well, if we want individuals from diverse backgrounds in general to be able to be aware of engineering, well, there are opportunities both informal, you know, so extracurricular things that children and stuff can get involved in, or there's the formal education system. Now, up until 4 years ago, engineering wasn't, at least in Ontario, wasn't really explicitly mentioned in the curriculum documents. But now, as of the 2022 curriculum in Ontario that got released, engineering design is embedded as one of the larger strands across the Ontario provincial curriculum. So to me, what's exciting is that, okay, we're at this pivotal moment. Yes, we're 4 years in now, but really the traction is really gaining some momentum here. So with the work that, you know, outreach organizations are doing, and then with those on the call, we're really at sort of almost like the start line to make significant impact, with my hope and the goal of being children and making their way through their education system by the time they get to grade 11 or to grade 12, that they're making those informed decisions to choose engineering as a career, whether or not it's the engineering technology programs or the traditional engineering backgrounds. So that way we help and we think about this as, you know, again, informed choices, and that'll help with retention and stuff as well. So those factors are what inspire me to do, you know, the work that we're doing here now.
That's great. And how about you, Chris? I know that you've been volunteering for a long time. What motivates you to get out there?
I am actually going to be selfish for a second. I'm going to say it helps engineers as well. So communication is like the first thing we look for on a resume or on an interview. And we're always like, this is the most important skill you have as a starting engineer. But honestly, in our jobs, like I go a day sometimes without seeing anybody face to face, especially post-COVID. And meanwhile, here we are talking to students, which is like the friendliest audience you'll ever have. super low intensity, like less than a client meeting, and you get to tell the interesting engineering stories that got you into engineering in the first place. So it's like the best place to go and work on that skill. So that's honestly why I got into it in the first place was I was this shy person and I needed to work on it. And this seems like a no-brainer for me.
Oh, wow, that's great. I mean, yeah, we're always thinking about, when we're going into classrooms or we're volunteering with other organizations that are engaging youth, what we could be giving to them. And sometimes we forget that we're getting something out of it as well. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really good perspective. The next question I wanted to move us into is sort of zeroing in a little bit more on this intent of the Forward Engineering Collective. So what I mean by that is that the Forward Engineering Collective, and we know everyone on this call, well, maybe not everyone on the call, but everyone on the panel is very familiar with the Forward Engineering Collective, and that it exists to advance 4 key actions. So to inspire connection, driving inclusion, showcasing engineering, and strengthening the impact of our collective outreach. So essentially, we created this group because we believe that by focusing on these areas, we can break down the barriers that prevent children and youth from fully exploring and engaging with engineering. So Scott, you had mentioned, like, how do we make sure that, and Rebecca, you had mentioned this as well, like, how do we make sure that engineering reflects the communities and the societies that it serves? So my question to you is, how are you advancing these actions in your work? And how are you meaningfully engaging and connecting youth through engineering to connect them to actual engineering? And I think maybe we'll start off with Isabel.
All right, so I'll speak to the first of our 4 collective actions is to inspire connection. And this collective action is all about addressing misconceptions about the profession and breaking down stereotypes of who are engineers. So for an organization like Let's Talk Science, we're interested in STEM outreach in general, and we think it's important, but we have a specific interest in engineering in this context because there's so few youth who really understand what engineers do. Unless maybe they have one in their family, but even then they might have a very narrow view of what it means. So using, again, a personal story, my mother's cousin was an engineer, and I knew he worked on hydroelectric dams, and he was the only engineer I really knew. So in my mind growing up, that's what engineers did. Like, that was the one thing. It wasn't for me, so I wasn't going to become an engineer. It's only much later that I realized like how broad the profession of engineering is and how many opportunities it's offered. It's so much more than that. So that's something I carry into my personal outreach, and that we build into the outreach activities that our volunteers do. To give an example, so often when I've been invited to go into a school on a career day to speak about engineering, like, that's a tough assignment, because how do you capture it just for an audience like that? So reflecting on how I could do justice to the diversity of engineering professions, what I have done is bring a model airplane in with me on career day, and I would use it as a prop to talk about all the different flavors of engineering and how they all work together to create the aviation industry in Canada. So I would introduce, there's chemical engineering, civil engineering, and so on, and ask the kids, what do you think a chemical engineer would contribute to the design of this airplane? Like, maybe it's the rubber, there's the paint, like high temperature materials, and so on. How about a mechanical engineer? How about a civil engineer? There's the runway and the infrastructure around the airport. Computer engineers, well, maybe, they're needed to design the simulators that the pilots train on. So I would kind of walk them through the diversity of the profession and ask them to reflect, which part of that would be the most exciting for you if you were part of this team that was contributing to this project based on their interests and all that. I would also make a point of passing around my iron ring to the kids and let them try it on. And I would tell some stories. So tell them about how when I was their age, I loved understanding how things worked and taking them apart and creating inventions for problems. I'll ask them, who has a little brother or a little sister, and do they get into your room and kind of make a mess? And when I was your age, that happened to me. And I invented like a little alarm system to tell me when my brother was coming in my room. And later on, like, those are the kinds of skills and interests that made it so that later on engineering was a good fit for me. So all those kinds of things are done with the goal of relating engineering to things that they see and they experience in everyday life, and to connect it to things that they're interested in. So I've shared from a personal perspective, but I think these can be adapted to anyone, and they're the kinds of principles that we instill in our volunteer training as well.
So it's great. So just to recap that is you try and make it as personal as possible, and really to help them understand the breadth of different possibilities that really exist within engineering. I really love that example of the plane and how you were able to name off all the different ways that you could be engaged. And then to share the passing around of the iron ring too, and just having them have an understanding of what that means. How did the kids sort of react to that when this concept of a ring? Because that's something that's kind of unique to engineering.
Yeah, it's interesting to, watch their faces as they do that. I mean, storytelling is important, and we might come back to that later, but I think just telling the story of the iron ring is really interesting. And my hope when they, passing it around is that they can start to imagine themselves, or to ask themselves, like, is this something I can see myself being in the future? Yeah, I think it's so critical. Like when we bring kids on campus as well, I often think, okay, well, this is maybe the first time they've been on a university campus, and often they like the activities we do, but when we ask them in surveys what was the most interesting, they say, oh, just like chatting with the student who like chaperoned us to lunch and things like that. So you kind of never know what is going to capture their imagination. So just kind of just coming at it from a variety of different approach, different things are going to hook different kids.
Can I add something, Kim? Because I
Yeah,
also
absolutely.
love to use the iron ring when I go into classrooms. Isabella, I love that you do that too. And the way I like to do it, and then the reaction I get is I'll say to them, like, hi everyone, like who's met an engineer before? And usually nobody puts up their hand unless their parents are an engineer. And I'll say, did you know? And I deliberately like move my hands around, and I'll say, did you know you can tell someone's an engineer just by looking at them? How do you think you can tell I'm an engineer? And they're usually like, oh, and I normally will have glasses on. I don't today because they're for distance, but like they'll say, oh, your glasses, or like I don't know, wear hard hats. Like they come up with all these things, and then eventually, like sometimes they'll figure it out. But like I really lean into that awareness piece, like because again, it's such an invisible profession. I'm like, well, you can actually now, if you see people wearing that ring, you know that they're an engineer, and you can maybe talk to them about it and meet more engineers.
And then so I guess just to follow up with you, what are some things that your organization does to help to advance one of
For
the
me?
collective actions?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's for sure. So I'll talk a little bit to the like in terms of those 4 collective actions, the improving impact piece. And at Engineers of Tomorrow, there are some specific things that we are doing directly as a result of the work of the Forward Engineering Collective. But I liked your approach, Isabel, and maybe I'll do something similar kind of on the personal side. Like I know I've gone into classrooms, and you do an amazing event, and you kind of walk away and you feel really good about it. But then you have time to reflect, and you're like, did I really move the needle? Like, is that having impact? And so this is something we spend a lot of time again thinking about and working with our volunteers and folks that are going to talk to kids about, is the difference between activity and impact. And gosh, like I feel so fortunate to be in this space and have the visibility of all the incredible engineering and STEM outreach organizations and programs that are happening across the country. I have met some of the most passionate volunteers. Like, oh, I'm so glad we're so fortunate to have Chris here today. Like he's doing such amazing work, and other really strong organizations with really thoughtful programs. But I think, and maybe a little bit to your point, Scott, too, there just seems to be this energy now with like engineering in the curriculum in Ontario, and there just is this national awareness that is lining up with this coordinated approach through the Forward Engineering Collective to have this systemic impact. And so for me, it feels a little bit like, all of us, in terms of us as individuals or organizations or programs we're running, like we've been rowing our boats as fast as we can, but maybe we all haven't been going in the same direction. So now it's like we can all sort of move in this similar way. And when I think about, again, coming back to like this idea of improving impact as the action that we can take, it's really moving from that our individual rowboats, isolated efforts to coordinated systems. And like I said, practically at Engineers of Tomorrow, we are doing some really tangible things. Like we have adjusted our training to be aligned with the known barriers that have been identified by the Forward Engineering Collective. So we're putting these tools into the hands of all these folks, and we're not having to reinvent it. Like it's there for us to connect and plug everybody into. We're able to like start thinking about gaps in the system instead of having this like duplicated effort that's happening. And just like, it sounds really simple, but just coming together and aligning on how we talk to kids about engineering so that kids are hearing these consistent messages. And we've also started to think about how we're measuring things. I mean, most of us on this call have a connection to engineering in some way. If you're not engineers yourself, we love data and the spreadsheets. So thinking a lot about what are we measuring? What is it telling us? Moving away from how many classrooms we visit, for example, to how are we really understanding whether those kids, those youth are actually leaving that experience with a clear understanding of what engineering is, or all the breadth of it. Like when you think of one thing, like your airplane example, Isabel, and all the other barriers that have been identified by the Forward Engineering Collective. Like as organizations at that level, we can start to maybe not remove, but add in some of these impact type metrics to help inform that conversation again on a national scale. So yeah, I think it really just boils down to systemic coordination, not about doing more, but it's about looking at what we're doing already and doing it better together.
Great. I know that you sort of started mentioning about education gaps, and I know that we've been talking a lot too around, very classroom focused pieces. Scott, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what your organization is doing. So I know that you have a lot of programs that are happening, after school and outside of the school system as well, and maybe what you're trying to do to try to drive inclusion and address some of those gaps that Rebecca was just sort of referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, and we've talked a little bit about it, sort of the change of the formalized education system to include engineering conversations in design. We're seeing, so I said, like I'm at Boys and Girls Club. So there's a Boys and Girls Club Southeast in Ontario where I am, but we also work with Boys and Girls Clubs across the country. So the opportunity to engage children and youth, is sort of at our mandate. But going back to what I was saying, if conversations are starting to happen more intentionally in formalized education systems around engineering and around design, students are maybe starting to hear those words. They're starting to explore things a little bit more. So then with my organization, and as well as a bunch of other organizations, they are providing these informal learning opportunities in after school programs or evenings or weekends. The way that I view this is really as additional opportunities for diverse children from various backgrounds, from socioeconomic to racial backgrounds, to a variety of things, to continue learning and getting these opportunities to see and explore what a STEM career or what engineering may be. Taking that even one step further, we also are aware that the importance on having representation makes a huge difference as well for children from diverse backgrounds. So we are intentional around having representation both in gender and in race in terms of who the instructors are that we have, as well as the volunteers that we bring in, because then that also helps for the young children to kind of see themselves sort of in that pathway. So that's some of the work that we're doing around that. The other part on socioeconomic and barriers are right. I mean, with young family and others now, I'm also starting to become aware on extracurriculars do cost money, right? If we look at the landscape of, we'll call it traditional sports or things that children may have been involved in, the price to attend and be a part of that is going up and up, right? So with the programs that our organization and that many others are able to do with support from donors, funders, corporations, industry, others in the ecosystem, what we're able to do is to provide these opportunities at a very affordable cost to families. And for those that even require additional financial resources, we're able to kind of waive those fees, right? Because the goal, as in terms of driving inclusion, really is to make sure that all children and youth, like I said, that want to be seeking out these opportunities, following a passion, and continue to learn in these fields have the opportunity to do that. So we have some physical locations, both in Kingston where I am, but then we also have traveling teams that go out to a bit more sort of rural communities. And I know across the country, there are a lot of other organizations that do the same thing to try to make STEM and engineering outreach opportunities, within a 20-minute drive or so of all children and youth. So that's some of the work that I know that I can speak to with our organization, but there's a lot of amazing work that's happening nationally to make it accessible.
That's great. I mean, I'm starting to see a number of different questions come in and comments, and we're hearing things like, Canada is a country of immigrants. We have people coming here from all over the place, and especially when they first get here, they might not fully understand how our systems work and how you can get engaged. And so I think in particular, when you're talking about these after school programs, and getting into school, I mean, the nice thing about schools and the programs that you're talking about is that everyone has to go to school. And so it is a chance for us to be able to reach and to talk to a real variety of youth, to help them understand what the possibilities are. But yeah, we definitely need to have lots of different opportunities, both inside and outside the school, to reach a real variety of youth and help them understand that this is a possibility for them. So thank you so much, Scott, for sharing that. I'm just looking at the time, and I'm thinking that maybe we'll move to the next question. Essentially, joining us today, there are hundreds of engineers. Many of them are eager to support the next generation. And so I'm wondering, what are ways that they can get involved in this work through you as an organization, and how do you support them? And I know I don't think we've gone first with Scott yet. So maybe Scott, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, so ways that we can get involved. So, I mean, as our organization, so I will acknowledge that, as an organization who engages, children and youth with programming, one of the things I'd like to offer right away is that we can help with the hurdles or the steps or the processes that are needed to be taken in order to engage children and youth. So, for example, like the background checks, or some of the other logistical things that you might be wondering, okay, well, how do I get involved? My first suggestion is obviously to reach out to maybe a local organization or some of the ones on the call to then express interest, and then see how that they can kind of support that. But specifically, what it is that we are looking for. We have a lot of volunteers and help. With some of the primary junior grades, so even that 4 or 5-year-old, all the way up to the grade 10, 11, 12. But what we're seeing as the time passes is that younger children are becoming more advanced and technical in some of their knowledge and their own competencies, way more than what I would have been able to do at that age, let alone even high school, then even into undergrad. So we're seeing these almost knowledge gaps that are being created both from what kids are learning in schools or to at home, and maybe they're not able to get the resources or help that can push them into more, technical areas. So that's one thing about it. And then the same thing when we talk about the complexities of engineering, right? We know that there's so many diverse pathways and professions that kind of go within it. It's crazy to think that we would be able to have a standardized script type of thing to say, hey, this is what this engineer does, this is what that one does. So I think having the various professions and engineers that have their own journey, becoming involved in talking about that pathway and what they do, it really helps the children or youth to really maybe draw their own connections to say, okay, that is something that I am interested in, and I didn't know about that. And then how they can say, take their passion, of a topic area and then see how engineering can kind of go together, right? So if we talk about sports, we talk about art, we talk about music, we talk about all of these pathways, but engineering doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Those two things can be married together. Right. So those are one of the things that we always talk about. But then a very specific call to action of what we would need as going back to it is that upper year technical thing. So in our organization, we build a lot of the robotics, getting kids advanced or learning about robotics. So coding, software, hardware, the mechanical side of things, how all of those kind of go together. So having the knowledge on how to use the machines or how to do design or how the integration comes in together, even project management, because some of the teams, they're a multi-month project that they're doing that have sub teams, and how do all those teams kind of come together, right? And working towards that. So those are some, again, a couple of examples of if there's people out there that have backgrounds or interest in that, coming in and volunteering and being able to share that knowledge is really critical.
That's great. I can attest to how, we have a whole new generation who are very tech savvy in particular, and there's different ways that we need to engage them. And I like how you touched upon the fact that as people want to volunteer and engage, it's not always, we intentionally create it in a way that way it's not easy to get in front of kids, and so working with organizations like the ones on the call today, being able to navigate the bureaucracy that exists for their protection, is something that you can definitely support and help. And so that's really great. Isabel, how about yourself?
Sure. So Let's Talk Science works with people at all stages of their career, but I'll put in a plug and say that we're an especially good place for engineering students or early career engineers to volunteer. So we have locally run outreach chapters in over 50 universities and colleges across Canada. I saw a question in the Q&A about Saskatchewan. So we do work with the University of Saskatchewan and First Nations University in Regina. So wherever you are, look us up. So at those locations, it's run as a self-operated chapter, but with support from the national office. So we'll offer training on all kinds of topics. For example, how to develop age-appropriate activity using age-appropriate language, how to make topics relevant to kids, how to apply an equity lens to your outreach work as well. So for example, we have a course about how to be an effective role model. It's something that takes a lot of intentionality. You can't just walk into a classroom and be an effective role model. There's a lot of research about what works and what doesn't. I saw a lot of questions that in the Q&A that I thought, oh, that course would answer that for you. So we take those kinds of research findings and turn them into training that's very practical and very actionable to put into practice as outreach. We also have an extensive library of hands-on STEM activities that volunteers can access from online write-ups of activities, and some of those are accessible to the public, so anyone can find them on our website. But we also have more that are for volunteers, as well as physical kits will help you create your own activity. If you do create your activity, we'll make sure that there's thousands of other volunteers across the country that can access it and use it in their communities. So that's a good way to plus up your impact. And for engineering students and early career engineers, I'll also mention, and that connects to some comments that Christopher made earlier, but there's a lot of skills that you develop through volunteering that then make you more hireable, more employable, and more effective in the workplace. So we'll teach you those skills skills through those experiences, but will also help you showcase those experiences in your resume, during interviews, and so on to help you get those early career opportunities as well.
That's great. I know I've been looking and scanning through the questions as well, and you're starting to see how there's like some themes that are coming out of the questions. And so thank you for addressing from the regional ones, but like how can we get involved regardless of where we're located in the country? There's many organizations, and Let's Talk Science and Engineers Tomorrow, both examples of national organizations where you have many opportunities across the country. My next question is actually going to go to Chris. So Chris, a lot of what I've noticed coming out of the questions is around this idea of the role modeling. And so people are wondering like, well, what's it like to be a volunteer going into these different classrooms, going in front of this young audience? What's your experience been like, and how do you kind of expose them to engineering in a way that excites them, but still preps them for the reality of the work? And particularly when you're trying to reach those diverse audiences as a white man. So what has your experience has been?
It's been fun, for sure. Honestly, yeah. First thing, telling your engineering story is probably the easiest way to do it. Like it's the most relatable thing about you. It's always going to have that connection. And yeah, like in my case, my hometown water supply got poisoned by a dry cleaner inadvertently. And I can always link that back to like the water quality work that you do now. It's really easy to link back your original engineering story to what you do now. And if you keep it simple and authentic, it's something that'll stick with them so that when they do actually see that in their own life, it's going to come up again and again. Yeah, like one time I went to talk to a grade 2 class, and they were doing a unit on structures. And so I was going to tell this whole like thing about Tacoma Narrows Bridge, was this big bridge collapse back in 1940. And I got like 10 seconds in, and this little grade 2 girl at the back puts up her hand and basically tells the whole story before we even get there. And I could have been annoyed because I was like, you kind of stole my punchline. But at the same time, I was just like, this is the kind of impact these stories have, because there's this 2-year-old, like a 7-year-old girl telling an 80-year-old story, like right then and there in front of her classmates. And I was like, yeah, that's the kind of way, that's the way to reach people. And that's kind of the experience.
That's great. So so a lot of questions here, and as someone who I know has been actively volunteering, so is there an experience that you've had that really stood out to you in the class? So you mentioned this one, but I know that you've been doing this for such a long time. Or like if there's one thing that you want to sort of share with a group of people who are like, I want to volunteer, and I really want to, especially if we're trying to get those diverse groups to consider engineering, people who we know probably haven't been exposed and aren't aware of it. Like what are some of the things that you've done to try and tell that story and to reach those groups?
I think the best example of that is I working with Engineers Tomorrow, I got connected to a class. And so they gave me some activities, and then the teacher basically told me we're doing this unit, which was in this case flight. So I was preparing a story, and I'm preparing a story of actually Elsa McGill. So again, if you don't know Elsa McGill, please do look her up. She has her own Heritage Minute. But I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to really tell the story very well, or it's not going to be, quite aimed well if I'm telling it. So I went to some other women engineers I worked with, and I said, would you be okay to share your stories? Because this is something that I think would be important here. And sure enough, they said yes. And like, shout out right now to those 3 colleagues of mine that like their personal stories made that class exciting. It made it really a good connection with those kids. So it is, you find the stories that you need, and the stories you need are the ones that connect with people.
That's great. I'm wondering if we should maybe tackle some of these questions that we have coming in. And so what I'm going to do is, for these questions, they'll just be open to everyone on the panel who wants to answer it. And maybe I'll just start right at the top because we have another. So the first one here says, Dear panelists, with regards to your mentions of culture, can you each talk about what you see as being the Canadian engineering culture? There are immigrant engineers who are Canadian engineers, and conversely, there are Canadian schooled engineers who are abroad in other countries performing engineering. I guess the sort of what the question's getting at here is just sort of maybe talk a little bit about culture and how do we even explain engineering, in its vast forms. And so I don't know if there's anyone who wants to take that on.
I can start us off with a partial answer. I would find it very challenging to describe a unique culture of engineering in Canada, just from my own experience, both in academia and industry and not for profit. There's a huge variety. So what I would say is to encourage people, just know that culture plays out differently in different settings, and even working with many of our different funders, like I've just been exposed to so many companies in this sector, and they're all different and they have different values and a different culture and so on. So I think there's a place for everyone, and I would encourage people to kind of explore and until you find kind of there's not a single culture that's going to fit everyone. But I think there's a lot of different places out there, and the opportunity to find a culture that works for you.
I would totally agree with that, Isabel, in my experience as well. And where my mind went with this question was like, I just would encourage you, and I loved your examples, Chris, of like, just reach out to some colleagues or friends or whatever. Like, you don't have to overcomplicate it. So really think, and Isabel, you talked about age appropriate messaging. So you're not going to go into a grade 1 class and talk about engineering culture and what that's like. There's you might want to focus on. And maybe I'll use this as a quick opportunity to mention this is one of the first things that we've done with the Ford Engineering Collective, is put together these sort of one-page resources to help you understand how to talk to those different ages or groups of ages and stages, and what the kind of key messaging can be at that level. So you can, I mean, there's obviously a time and a place to talk about culture, and we think about that, and we try and be very strategic about it, but like really think about your audience and what are the messages that they need to receive at those points in time throughout their pathway journey through the system.
I will say, as far as culture, they're all different, but they're all the sameness too. We were just having lunch, and a junior engineer who just got their iron ring last week was showing it off, and we were all geeking out equally. There was no difference. Like young engineers, old engineers were like, wow, it's like shiny. It's so like clean.
I will say, just in the breadth of engineers that I get exposed to through our work, and maybe Isabel, you and Scott too, right? But gosh, like they're just so passionate and they love to talk about what they do. And you reminded me of that, Chris, when you were just saying like, yeah, they're geeking out over some of that kind of stuff.
And
Oh, go ahead, Scott. Yeah,
I'll just offer a quick thought on it as well. I mean, obviously acknowledging my perspective, as a white man kind of in the engineering, I know that that's probably been the traditional norm, and my pathways may have been easier than some others. But I think by saying that, I'm also very much aware, by being in this engineering education sector for the better part of 12 years, I believe the culture and the conversations at colleges and universities, as well as with what's happening in the profession, conversations are happening. There's a lot more truth. There's a lot more transparency and intentionality around the culture, that may have contributed to retention issues. Because I know that there was obviously conversations around, okay, how many graduates of an engineering program don't stay in engineering, or they don't make it into the PEng, right? So I guess I'm only saying that, acknowledging that this is still a complex problem that is not going to get solved like that, but being open and having those conversations to wanting to be more of an inclusive environment and profession, I think are happening.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like when I was reading again through the questions, there was a few that came up around culture. As New Engineers Canada leads the 30 by 30 initiative, so we know that there's work to be done around that area, and we're proactively as a community really starting to work on that to ensure that as we're bringing in these new young minds, that we're bringing them into a profession that is welcoming and inclusive. And I think that one of the things that I'm hearing too from the panelists is that what we start to talk about and how we frame engineering is really dependent on what the youth are capable of taking in at that time too. And so a big part of the way that I'm hearing that you support volunteers when they go into those classrooms and telling their stories and how far they go in different areas. Like this is your area of expertise. You understand where youth are developmentally to make sure that you're helping them to craft their message for those audience. So that way those youth are really getting the most out of that experience and are able to make those decisions when they're presented. One more thing from the question piece that I think also addressed a couple of different questions that I saw in there is there was a question around, well, how do we address some of the stereotypes? So even when we're talking about like an Iron Ring, which is help with that personal story, but there is a lot of stereotypes that are certainly Connect Engineering. So not only do we not know a lot about it, but sometimes when we do, you ask a young person still to this day, draw an engineer, and someone's got a hard hat and it's a guy and he's got some kind of tool in his hand. So I'm just wondering how, and this is to the panel, like, so what's some of the things that you're doing to help support volunteers through telling their story? Because like you're one person, you know what I mean? Like how did they, through their story, how do you support them in being able to reach the entire audience and break down some of those stereotypes?
So I think it's very important to to have diverse role models for youth. So we do, when we recruit volunteers, that's something we pay special attention to, being welcoming to everyone who wants and can volunteer, because it is important for youth to see themselves reflected. It helps them imagine themselves in that role later on. Some other panelists touched on it, but there are many ways, if you're, somebody who's from a group who's traditionally overrepresented or really well represented in the profession, that doesn't mean that you can't help be a part of doing that as well by showcasing videos and images and stories of engineers, like a wide variety of different demographics of engineers. There's also many different kinds in which you can, as a role model, make yourself relatable to youth. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the same gender or from the same background and so on. Just finding like little commonalities and noticing, oh, this kid, is wearing a hockey jersey. I also play hockey. Like maybe I draw from that, and just kind of show that we have something in common. So those little pieces are just some little practical ways in which you can make yourself relatable to kids as well.
You're reminding me, Isabel, that there's some really interesting research and maybe this is kind of what you're referring to and what informs your training, but the work of Engendering Success in STEM, and they've put out some incredible stuff, and there's very specific interventions that they recommend. So as engineers, we want to like plan and prep and be all ready to go into the classroom. And so we like to think of it as we give you the tools that you need, the science, the social science, to engineer an experience in the classroom for whatever kind of diverse group you're looking at. And I think another really big part of it, with role models and all the things you mentioned, Isabel, is really trying to connect to why engineers do what they do. And the messaging has really been stubbornly stuck around, well, engineers are just good at math and science, so go do engineering. But we work really hard and we study really complex things because we want to help people. And as engineers, we can connect to the living world and helping people, that really underpins and motivates what we're doing.
And I wanted to add something, Kim, before you come back on there. I'm just recognizing the time that we're almost done, but I wanted to say this earlier that it slipped my mind. But Chris brought up a point. I'm like, okay, well, engineers, like we get something out of this as well in terms of that communication skill. And I wanted to bring it up because I know conversations are happening around the continuous professional development that engineers need to do in terms of their maintaining their PEng license and the regulatory bodies and stuff. So I'm planting the seed because I don't have it knowing from province to province what is able to be, counted towards that. But I wanted to encourage people on this call that as part of your continuous professional development hours that you may be looking to do is seek out to see locally or through your regulatory if opportunities to be engaged with volunteering and talking about, the complex problems of engineering and how you are working towards the greater professional goals of safety and whatnot. Like a lot of things can align to the engineering profession. But I'm hoping that, through those bigger bodies, that those professional development hours will be able to be counted within a K to 12 sector, because then we can kind of close that loop. We can tell the story, we can increase awareness, we can build capacity, all things around the larger goal of, the bettering the profession.
Absolutely. And I know that we're hoping to close it out. I'll still give you guys a chance for those who want to stick with us for long, but for those who do have to have a hard stop at the 2:30, I just want to thank everyone for attending today. Know that we will be following up with everyone who signed up today. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that not only do you have the emails so that way you can reach out to these panelists and learn more about what they do and connect with them, but we'll also send you a couple of different resources that we know that can help you share your respective engineering stories that are age appropriate, and also a variety of different ways that you could be engaging in National Engineering Month. Today's the kickoff, but it's day one of a 5-week journey that we have now for the rest of the month. So there are plenty of ways that you could be engaging. And what I really liked about what the panelists said too is that, it's not just an opportunity to tell your story, but you can bring other stories into it too to really make sure that we're connecting with a real diverse group of individuals. So with that, I will give all the panelists one opportunity here to, if you have to leave this group with one message, one key thing, what is it that you'd like to be? And I'm going to start it off with Chris. What would you like to leave the audience with, Chris?
More than anything, it's refreshing to tell your story. It's fun to talk about things that we enjoy talking about, and it's something we should be doing more in our careers anyway. So this is just a really good way to do it.
Rebecca.
I wanted to say that, if you going into a classroom or connecting with maybe Scott's programs and giving some technical expertise or being a subject matter expert might feel like this one thing that you've done, but I really want you to know that you're part of something big, because you're connecting to the messaging and these bigger systems. And so when we look at it in that way, we can really have some exciting and systemic change going forward.
Scott.
Really, just that one opportunity can provide a spark that could help reconstruct or shape a young child's lens on what engineering can be. All it takes is one opportunity.
Isabel, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. You can make a difference even if you just participate in a single activity. I already shared that for me, like participating as a kid in one activity really changed the course of my studies and career. And I'm not the only one. So we hear numerous stories every year about people who join like post-secondary students who join Let's Talk Science as volunteers, and they tell us they remember a volunteer coming to their classroom and doing an activity, and that's part of what set them on that course and part of why they signed up to be a volunteer as well. So you can do it. Just one activity can make a difference. So that's my call to action for everyone on the call.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for everyone who took the time to join us today. Happy National Engineering Month. And if you have the capacity to be able to give, know that there's lots of opportunities for you to donate your time to be able to help to inspire that next generation. And through the Forward Engineering Collective, we'll be able to help to connect you to a lot of different organizations that are eager to have you share your story, and we'll support you in doing so. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And again, happy National Engineering Month. Take care.